All right, sorry about that. I have no idea. Tonight is not our night in terms of Facebook Live, apparently. That's twice now that the videos got ended early. So
Yeah,
we tried to disconnect from the Wi-Fi. Hopefully that will make a difference.
Yeah, we haven't had that happen in a long time, but maybe there's something going on with our Wi-Fi. So tried to reconnect here with just using data. So hopefully the video works better now. If you are watching live, let us know if everything looks good with the video now, because we're not on Wi-Fi anymore. We're on data. But we were in the middle of answering a question about contract cancellation. So to summarize, it's harder to know. I mean, there's no way for sure to prevent being canceled. But I will say that if you go for more rural areas or go for places that are not necessarily the top desirable contracts, those are going to be less likely to get canceled. So if you get a dream location like in Hawaii or San Diego, and they're having you there for a short time because they can't find a permanent person, it's really likely that type of contract could, or I guess not really likely, but it's probably more likely that type of contract could get canceled because maybe someone's going to come in to fill the spot. And as we've always said before, too, it also really depends on your discipline. So I know the person who had asked this question, who has had a few of her contracts canceled, is an occupational therapist. Unfortunately, OTs, it's probably a little bit more likely for OTs, for PTAs, and for CODAs. It's not as likely for PT and SLP because PT and SLP is just more in demand. There's more jobs than there are therapists. So it is a little bit tougher, and contract cancellations are a little more common for OT, PTA, and CODA. So we always tell, especially those disciplines who might be a little more likely to get canceled, we always recommend that you have a backup plan, that you have savings, you have an emergency fund in case of a cancellation. Make sure that you're working with a few different recruiters. So that way, if you do get your contract canceled, they can work hard to try to find you another contract right away. So hopefully you don't go that much time without missed work. Some other things to do as a contingency plan for contract cancellations would be try not to get locked into housing for more than a month at a time. Try to do a month to month. So that way, worst case scenario, you're only out 1 month's rent, not more. What was the other thing I was going to say? Housing. Try to get a 30-day cancellation notice in your contract if possible. So then you have at least 30 days to plan if you do get canceled.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way to prevent it, but if you ask questions and you try to find contracts that are, more certain in terms of just short-term needs instead of they're looking for someone, you're going to have a lot better odds in that situation. But, I will say, like we said, we've had one contract canceled in all this time, and we normally go to places where they're looking for full-time staff. So even then, it doesn't happen a lot, but yeah, like Whitney said, I think OT and assistants do get canceled more often just because the need is less than for PT and SLP.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing you can do to try to prevent it would just be to ask questions during the interview, find out if it's the type of place that might be likely to extend you longer. And if they say something about an extension, then that's a good sign they're probably going to at least need you for the 13 weeks.
Yep. Okay. Why do travel companies reimburse mileage from one's tax home to the assignment location instead of from one assignment to the next? So this is probably a legal reason why they do this. So especially if you're taking a contract not with the same company. So say you took your last contract with one company, you take a new contract with the next company. They have no way to substantiate where you were on your last contract. So all they have is your home address and the address of the location. So they can't legally reimburse you from one assignment to another because they didn't place you in that assignment. If it is with the same company, it might be for the same reason. Maybe they've been advised by their legal counsel that they can only reimburse from tax home to assignment location, and each contract is its own thing. And also, most travelers go home between assignments. It's not always, especially if you're real far from home, but for us, a lot of times we took breaks in between assignments, at least a weekend or something, we might go home and then go to the next assignment. So maybe that's just what they're thinking, is that you finish an assignment, you go home, and then you go to the next assignment, and that makes it look more like you're a legit traveler, that you have a tax home you go back to and you go to the next assignment. So that's most of the reason for that.
Okay, so the next question we got was about setting up a tax home. And this person said, this will probably need to be answered by travel tax, but wondering if you might have some insight. So if you guys don't know, we highly recommend, in terms of setting up your tax home, that you do set up a consultation with a site like Travel Tax or with another tax professional, just to make sure you have it all squared away. We're definitely not tax professionals, but we have interviewed and talked to tax professionals before, so we can try to relay some information from what we've heard from them. So they were wondering about the two different options. So basically, the two different options for setting up your tax home would be that you pay rent to someone's. Well, either one other option, a third option would be that you own your own place. But if you're going to rent or stay at someone else's place, for example, your parents' house, you could set it up as though you're a renter and you would have a lease with them saying that you rent a space there. Or the other option would be to say that you are an adult member of the household and you are splitting the cost of the house evenly. And this route is called shared expenses. So this person wanted to know, should my monthly contribution be factored by the number of bedrooms in the house, the number of people in the house, or the number of contributors to the mortgage? They wanted to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, so I think it's always good to talk to a tax professional if you have any questions, but just based on what we've learned from tax professionals over the years, if you're going to go the shared expenses route, then you should take the number of adults in the house and divide all the expenses by the adults in the house. So you'd want to divide like whatever the mortgage payment is, the homeowner's insurance, the property taxes, if applicable for that state, the utility costs, so electricity, water, gas, all those costs divided by the number of adults in the house, and that's how you would share expenses. And you might be wondering, why would you go through all that hassle? Well, technically, from the accountants that we've talked to, if you're going the shared expenses route, then the person that you're paying that money to doesn't have to report that on their taxes as rental income because it's a roommate. You're a roommate, you're splitting the expenses. You know, if you think back to college, if you had roommates, you're not counting their rent payment on your taxes because they're a roommate. Whereas if you're actually renting a room, then for a set amount and has nothing to do with the expenses of the house, then technically the person is supposed to report that on their taxes. So that's the understanding we have. You should divide the costs by the number of adults in the house, and that's how you should come up with the shared expense amount.
Yeah, and so in some cases the shared expense route might actually be a little bit more expensive for you, but then it would keep your parent or your family member or your friend from having any legal implications for having a renter at their house. So if you set it up like you just pay them to rent a bedroom in the house, that might be cheap because in your area they might rent bedrooms in a house on Craigslist for $300 or $400 or $500, and that might be a really cheap route. But technically, if they were to get audited, they should be showing that they're receiving rental income. Yeah. So there's some pros and cons there, some things to consider.
Yeah, and again, always talk to a tax professional to make sure, especially if the person receiving the income is at all uncertain about that, make sure that that's legit because that's just what we've heard.
Yeah, that site, Travel Tax, they offer what's called a tax home consultation. I wish they had that back when we started. They kind of had it like sort of informally, but now you can just formally set up a tax home consultation phone call with them. It's only, I think, $50 or $55, and they'll go over your whole tax home situation with you, and you say, like, I want to do this, and this is where I've been living, and this is where I've been working, but I want to make this my tax home. What do you think about that? And then they'll give you legal advice about what would work for tax purposes.
Yep.
Okay, next we got a couple of finance related questions. So one of our course group members wanted to know about getting advice on setting up her own retirement account outside of her employer's retirement account.
So for W-2 employees, which pretty much all of you guys are going to be W-2 employees through the travel company, there's really all you can do is 401k through your employer. You can do an IRA, an individual retirement account outside of your employer, and those are really your only retirement account options. If you were a self-employed, a 1099 employee, which some travelers do travel 1099, but it's much more rare, it's more difficult, then you have other options like a SEP IRA, or you have an individual 401k, things like that. But for a W-2 employee, your options are very limited. So most of you guys, you're not going to have the option to open these self-employed retirement accounts. So your only option is going to be an IRA outside of your 401k.
Yep. And we just had a phone call, one of our mentorship phone calls with another one of our course group members, and she was in the same boat. She's like, I've been saving, but I don't really have any retirement accounts set up. How do I go about doing that? So depending on what level you're at in this stage of setting up, financial accounts and that sort of thing, just to break it down and make it really simple for you if you've never set up this on your own. What Jared's saying is outside of if you want to do your 401k with your employer, outside of that, if you'd like to set up an individual retirement account, an IRA, you would just go to one of the organizations that offers that. So there's Vanguard, there's Fidelity, Charles Schwab. There's a few different ones. We do ours at Vanguard. So for example, if you want to do it at Vanguard, you would just go to vanguard.com and you would select, that you want to set up an individual retirement account. You create an account. It's kind of like creating an online bank account. You would just go on there and create an account, and then you transfer money from your bank. So you'd link up your bank account to that account, transfer money in. Jared, what are the maximums for the IRA each year?
IRA right now, I think it's $6,500 for this year, and 401k I think is like $19,500 or something for this year.
So if you want to set up an IRA for this year, you can contribute $6,500, and so you could transfer that all at once if you had it sitting in a savings account, or you could decide to transfer a little bit of time throughout the year to set up that retirement account for yourself. And then once it's in the account, it's kind of like a savings account. It'll be sitting there, and then you have to elect to put it into investments within that account. So if you just leave it sitting there, it'll be basically like a savings account. But then you can go in there and click buy. And what buy means is that you're going to buy into some funds. And so we typically have gone with just index funds. There's a lot more research you could do about investing if you want to learn more about it, but quite often a lot of folks will just go with an index fund, and that's what they're going to buy within their retirement account.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the simple version of just how to get started with that. We have a lot of resources and a lot of books and blogs and articles that you could read to learn more about how to invest from that point forward. But that's the really simple way to just open your own retirement account, to open an IRA.
I just realized for 1099, I said it wrong. I said individual 401k. It's a solo 401k that you can open if you are a 1099 employee. So your options as a 1099 are going to be solo 401k, SEP IRA, or a simple IRA. And which one you would choose, it depends on how much money you're making, if you have any employees, all that kind of stuff. But like I said, for W-2, which 99% or maybe all of you are W-2, it's just a regular IRA, and you can either choose traditional or Roth, depending on how you want to have it taxed.
Yeah. So this next question piggybacks off that same one. So this person wanted to know, after maxing out my Roth, which is an IRA, the Roth IRA, and my 401k, what are some of your other preferred investments or passive income sources that you recommend looking into? So this is great. If you're already at the point where you've already maxed out a 401k, you've already maxed out an IRA, so say that means for you, you've contributed about $25,000 to investments already this year. That's wonderful. Yeah. Now you're like, I've got all this other money, because that's what a lot of us want to do who are trying to become financially successful travel therapists. Like, we're trying to get to financial independence. We're trying to max out our investment accounts really early on and put so much money into savings, because we're making a lot as travel therapists, right? So you want to put a lot in savings, but you don't just want it sitting in a checking account, right? So now what do I do after I've put that first $25,000 away? Where do I put the rest? Yeah,
I would say first thing is congratulations, because probably 1% of people max out both their 401k and IRA in a year. Like, that is an extremely small number of people. So to be able to do that, you're already way ahead of most people. That's really good. I would say another account, if you happen to have a high deductible insurance plan, an HSA is the best account that you can contribute to, in my opinion, because whereas a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, you either get taxed on the money up front or when you withdraw. An HSA, when you put money in and you use it on qualified medical expenses, you don't get taxed on it when you put it in or when you take it out. So an HSA, and you can invest that money, depending on what account you're using for the HSA, you can invest that money in index funds as well. So an HSA, I think, is my preferred account if you have access to it, to max that out first. So if that's an option, do that. If not, then your options are basically a brokerage account, so an after-tax brokerage account that you can open, or you can invest in things like real estate, or you can go crypto or something like that. So your options are, you don't have a ton of options for what to do with money after that. So a brokerage account probably is what most people are going to do, and you can invest in that just like you would anything else. You can invest in index funds or bonds or real estate indexes or whatever you want to invest in. But besides that, maybe real estate, there's a bunch of different options with that. You can either buy short-term rentals, you can buy long-term rentals, you can invest in some of these sites now that are like crowd-funded real estate, so you basically are buying fractional ownership of a property. So I would say those are probably the next steps.
Yeah, I would say for us personally, we've got IRA, we've got 401k, we've got HSA, we have some money in the crowdsourcing that you were talking about. It's
called Fundrise. That's what we use.
Where it's like a crowdsourcing way to invest in real estate. We originally thought about doing rental properties. We've decided not to go that route right now. But that is an option that some people think about, or house hacking in some other way. We do house hack. We do have a renter in our place right now, and we've had renters in the past, so we've house hacked in that way to make some income off of our property. But we haven't invested in any other rental properties.
Yeah, and that's something you could think about too, is just buying a personal residence that you can rent out rooms in while you're traveling to generate some income and then hopefully have appreciation in that property over time. So something else you can consider, but I would say probably the lowest hassle, easiest way is to just open a brokerage account and invest in index funds just like you would in your 401k and your IRA.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you guys who are newer to investing, your brokerage account is basically the same. It works the same, except that there's no tax advantages because you're not putting it in like a 401k or something that has like these tax advantages. Now, the benefit of doing a brokerage account, yes, you're putting in money that's already been taxed, but you can take it out at any time. Whereas
and there's no limits. You can put unlimited amounts of money in there.
Yeah, so you just can only, for a 401k or an IRA, only put a certain amount each year that they're going to give you these tax breaks on, and then you can't touch it. With some exceptions, for the most part, you can't touch it until retirement age. Whereas a brokerage account, that's just like having a regular old investment account where you're investing in stocks and bonds and index funds and all these things. And you can just put the money in as much as you want, take it out whenever you want. For the most part, if you're doing it as a long-term investment, you should just put it in and leave it and have a strategy there. But that's just a brokerage account. I never really knew that's what it was called until I learned more about it. But that's just basically an investment account.
Yep.
So those are some ideas for further investing. I think the other thing I was going to say are some high yield savings accounts. You might consider that. It's not really an investment necessarily, but if you do have extra cash sitting around, try to see, instead of just having it in your checking account, see if there is a high yield savings account you could at least have it in.
Yeah, for the last couple of years, that really wasn't an option, but now there are some savings accounts paying 2.5% or 3% interest, which is not too bad.
Definitely better than having it just sitting in your checking account.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But always make sure to have some, at least in an emergency fund, that you can easily access in a savings or checking account. Don't put all your money into investments. Definitely keep some. Okay. Another finance question. This is about credit card hacking and using points. This person wanted to know, are there any hacks for using Chase points for flights that you know of?
So your options are fairly limited. Always the best value for any transferable points like Chase or American Express, Citi, are to go with transfer partners. And with those transfer partners, you're relatively limited. So for Chase, for domestic flights, almost always Southwest is going to be the most cost-efficient way, as long as you're near an airport where you can fly Southwest and you're going to a destination where Southwest flies to. Southwest is the best value, in my opinion. For international flights, for Chase points, you can pretty much only transfer to United. They have some other partners that I haven't really used a ton, but I transfer a lot of points to United for international flights. And with those, you can usually get pretty good value. Like I think our upcoming trip to Greece is United, and I think it was only $25,000 for a one-way flight from our home airport all the way to Greece, which is pretty good. So 25,000 points would be, if you just cash that in for dollars, would be $250, and the flight is probably a $650 flight. So that's a really good value for those points. So those would be my choices. Either domestic, you transfer to Southwest, use them there. International, you transfer to United and use them that way. The other thing that you could see is if you have the Chase Reserve card, you can sometimes cash those points out on the Chase portal for 1.5 cents per point, which is pretty reasonable. So if you have a flight that you're looking at and you can't get it through United or Southwest, then you might want to go through the Chase portal, put in the destinations you're looking at, and see what it would be if you cash those points out for the flight through the portal. And like I said, Reserve, you get 1.5 cents per point. For the Preferred, you get 1.25 cents per point, which still could be worth it depending on what you're looking at, if it's very specific, the flight you need.
And I'm so thankful that Jared knows so much about credit card hacking and using all these points, because we've been stacking up points for so many years and signing up for so many credit cards. And it's so nice when you finally go to book a trip and you're like, I usually ask Jared, I'm like, what points do we have? Which hotels or which flights should I look at? Which points do I have available? And it's really come in very handy for us to be able to plan some long international trips But even on our like U.S. road trips too, we've used a lot of hotels and some flights domestically.
Yeah, and for you guys, if you haven't got into racking up Chase points or any credit card points in general, even if you don't travel a lot right now, if you're doing a lot of contracts, you're not taking a lot of time off, and if you are taking time off, it's like time with family at home, and you think, oh, I'll never use this. That's kind of how we were in the beginning. We didn't use many points back then. Between like 2015, 2018, we took like one international vacation. So, you might have thought at the time like, oh, it's kind of a waste to do this, but now we're using a ton of points. So racking up those points ahead of time really has paid off for us now. So it might be something you think about. You never know what's going to happen in the future, and you might have a situation where you start doing a lot of international travel later on when you're in better financial shape, and then all those points will really help you out.
Yeah, or I mean, even for just like, even if you don't take off for several months at a time, even if you just take for like a 1 week vacation. I remember the first time we did that, I was so excited because Jared had really been doing a lot of research in our first couple of years of traveling about credit card hacking and points. And to me, I didn't see the point back then. I didn't really understand. But he was just working hard on these credit card rewards and saving up points. And then all of a sudden, we were like, let's take a trip. It was just a 1 week trip. I think maybe even it was like a 6-day trip. And we were like, where can we go? And so he started looking at the points and was like, oh, we could go. There's a hotel in Jamaica. We could go there. And I'm like, great. He literally booked the entire like 6 or 7 day trip with points completely. And I was like, wait a minute, we're just here for free, basically, the flight, the hotel, everything. And I was like, this is cool.
Yeah, that was actually what really got me hooked on credit card points. That was 2016, that was my first time out of the country, really. And I think we ended up spending a total of $20 in total, like the whole time there, because I think that the hotel even included a shuttle from the airport to the hotel. We had all inclusive. The biggest expense we had on that whole trip was parking at the airport back home, which is crazy. So it can really pay off.
Yeah. So definitely try to get into that if you haven't. You don't have to go crazy with it. We've told people before, if you're just getting started with credit card hacking, just do a couple a year, just like 1 to 4 cards a year. Usually the spending requirement is a 3-month window. So you can easily do 1 card every 3 months, which would be 4 cards for the year. Or if that seems like too much, just do 1 or 2. And you can really rack up a lot of points.
Yeah, and any of you guys watching live, if you have any questions or follow-up questions on anything we're talking about, feel free to ask those.
Yeah. Okay. Another kind of finance-related question. How should newer grads be thinking about buying property, especially given the current and probable future housing market and macroeconomic context? To me, interest rates above 5 to 6% seem just to make buying property an unwise financial decision right now. How should we be thinking about this and planning for it?
I think that was Lucas's question. I just saw he joined too. So shout out to Lucas. It's a good question. In my opinion, right now, this is like the most unprecedented rise in interest rates in history. So we've seen interest rate rises like in nominal terms this amount before, but to go from such a low rate to, it went from 2% to 7% in less than a year. That's, if you think about that in percentage terms, that's like a 200, 300% increase. That's insane. So that's crazy. So I would say right now to buy kind of seems crazy to me, because what's happened is the rates are increasing way faster than prices are coming down. And the reason you know that's the case is because if you look at the number of new home sales like across the country right now, they're dropping quick. And there's some charts showing that new home sales are down, like, depending on the area, this is very area specific, but there's some areas that new home sales are down like 60 to 80%, which is very indicative of a softening housing market. So I think right now buying is kind of crazy. With interest rates this high, buyers can't afford to buy houses, which means that the release valve has to be the prices of the properties. And so I think probably in the next 3 to 6 months, maybe a year, we're going to see housing prices fall in a lot of markets 30, 40% maybe. There might be some markets that hold up really well. So it all depends on where you're looking. I've seen some areas already down 15 to 20%. So, and there's other areas where the prices haven't gone down at all. So it depends on where you're looking, but in my opinion, I would wait. I think this is probably a really difficult time to buy, and I just think that housing prices have not caught up with the rate increases. And I mean, it's clear that housing prices have been overinflated for quite a while. And the reason for that is because financing was so cheap, and suddenly that's not the case. So prices almost have to come down. And the reason I say that are overinflated is if you use any metric like median or average income versus median home sales price, we're at all-time high levels. So that tells you that the prices are insane, and any rate above 4 or 5%, it's just not sustainable. So I think I would wait probably 3 to 6 months, maybe even a little bit longer, and just watch and see what happens, because right now it's definitely a buyer's market. There's in our area I've been watching, and price cuts are happening all the time, and I think that's going to continue. So yeah, I would wait right now.
And that would be for people who are thinking about buying a personal home or an investment property?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so kind of along the same lines of housing, but a little bit different. This is more back related to traveling and finding housing. I believe this question came from someone who has not started traveling yet. Cost and availability of short-term housing. Is it getting any better or worse in the current market? So this person was wanting to know about finding housing as a traveler on assignment. So I actually made a poll in 2 of the groups that we run that have a couple thousand people in it, because we have only done one short-term housing search recently, and that's when we were in Alaska. And for us, that was the most money by a long shot that we had spent on housing. But we weren't for sure, okay, is this only because it's Alaska and it's in the summer and it's a popular time, so forth and so on. So in our opinion, yes, the housing market in terms of short-term housing is up. But we wanted to make sure to get some feedback across a lot of folks. And over 70% of the people that we polled said that they felt like short-term housing is up. Now, that said, there were 30% that had kind of other responses. Some of them said it's about the same, and it just kind of depends on where you're looking, but the majority of people did say that housing prices are up for finding short-term housing.
Yeah, and again, this is very area specific. So just like with buying houses, I said we've already seen some places drop 60, 80% in number of sales each month. There's some places that haven't dropped at all. Rent prices are kind of the same way. I've seen some groups that I follow, short-term rental groups, where Airbnb landlords and stuff, which is a good proxy for the people we want to rent from, their bookings are down sometimes 60% on the year compared to last year. And they're looking at month-over-month numbers, and they're like, where are all the renters at? Whereas there's other ones that are still increasing their prices. So this is very area specific. And I think this market environment for housing, especially both renting and buying, is the most area specific it's been in our lifetimes. So you really have to look at it on a individual basis, what city you're going to, what's happening in that city, because there's probably some places right now that are at or below COVID levels, and there's probably some places that are still double COVID levels. Like if you're going to Austin or Miami, I think those cities had just massive booms of people moving down there for during COVID, and because of that, housing prices and rental prices are up. I think Miami, I heard it's up over 100% in 1 year, which is ridiculous. So it really depends on where you're going.
Yeah, so it really just depends. We definitely heard from some folks that said they're still able to find affordable short-term rentals, but it always varies. Like we always talk about, and I know we go over it in the course when it comes to housing, it's going to depend on what you're looking for. If you're somebody who's looking for a 2-bedroom place because you have a spouse or a pet or family with you, versus somebody who's willing to rent maybe an efficiency or a room in somebody else's place, it's going to vary a lot. So the feasibility of finding cost-efficient housing is just going to depend on the location of the job and what housing you need. But also, I would say on the flip side of that, for the most part, pay rates are still up for jobs. So for the most part, pay rates are kind of offsetting the higher rent costs, but not always. It's just really going to depend on the job. So it's probably a good idea if you are looking at a job, if you do have a potential offer, maybe run a couple quick searches. You won't always be able to determine your housing before you need to accept or decline the job, but you could at least get an idea of what's available. Furnished Finder is a really great place to just at least feel out what the availability is. Now, it doesn't always mean if you look on Furnished Finder, like if you contact the landlord, it might not be available. It might be taken by the time you need it, but it'll just give you a range or an idea of what might be some prices you see in the area.
Yeah, one other thing I forgot to add about whether you should buy right now. So what you have to remember too about rates increasing for mortgages is that people aren't going to want to sell their house, because if you sell your house and you had a mortgage, most people have refinanced down to a really low rate while rates were low. If they sell their house right now, they're moving to another house where the rate's much higher. So say you had a $300,000 house and you're moving to another $300,000 house. There's some situations where you might sell your house, get rid of that loan, take out a new loan for the new house, and your payment might almost double. So if that's the case, why would you sell your house? And that's some of the argument for why people think that the market might not decrease. But the reason I think it will decrease is because if you look at the number of new homes under construction right now, we're at all-time highs. We're over 2007 to 2008 levels, which were already insane. There's something like 1.6 million new constructions right now. So what that means is for existing home sales, numbers are going to be down a lot because most sellers are not going to want to sell and move to a new house at a higher rate. Most buyers can't afford houses at this rate. So if there were no new homes coming on the market, then we'd be at a standstill. Buyers can't buy high prices, sellers don't want to sell at low prices. But because of all these new homes coming on the market, I think that's going to push prices down, and you'll see prices decrease quite a bit. So I just wanted to add that. Another thing about the rents we asked about was rentals for campgrounds.
Oh, hang on, before we get into that.
Okay.
I wanted to answer a couple more things we got a couple questions about finding housing. So Megan says, can you list some different sites or places where you look for short-term housing other than just Airbnb and Furnished Finder? I know we have this in the course in the housing section, and then I'm looking real quick for, I believe we also have it on our article, our Housing 101 article. So Airbnb and Furnished Finder. In fact, Airbnb is really not as good as it used to be for short-term housing. A lot of travelers are contacting Airbnb hosts and then trying to talk to them on the side to negotiate a rate outside of what it's showing on Airbnb, because if you go through Airbnb for long-term rentals, there's a lot of fees associated with it, and quite often it's charging you based on the nightly rate they have listed, and it's like an exorbitant amount. Like we were looking at some of the Airbnbs for our Alaska housing search, and it was going to be like $10,000 to $20,000 a month based on what they had listed. It was ridiculous. So some people will send a private message and say, would you be willing to do, a set monthly rate for a healthcare professional? But Furnished Finder is definitely your best bet. Some people have had luck on Craigslist. We have had luck on Craigslist before. You just have to be aware of scams. Be a little more
we've
wary.
Actually found, I think, 2 or 3 places on Craigslist. So yeah, it's not as good as it used to be, but you can still find places. You have to be very careful. There's a lot of scams on there now.
Some other options would be websites like VRBO, which would be kind of similar to Airbnb. Facebook Marketplace, searching on there, it's like a easier to vet Craigslist really. Facebook groups, so there's a lot of Facebook groups for travel nursing housing is usually the search term you want to use, as well as travel therapy housing. You can also use some other strategies like searching apartment complexes. Some people will go with unfurnished places and just try to negotiate a 3 or 6 month lease, but apartment complexes aren't usually very flexible, so that's not always your best bet, but you could look into it. You could also search for short-term corporate housing or extended stay motels.
Yeah, I would say another good option is to, if you have an assignment location in mind already, say you've already interviewed or something like that, ask the manager. We've done that before, and sometimes they have an idea of maybe someone in the facility might be renting a place or something like that. So ask the manager if they have any options, and then another thing that you could do is reach out to local realtors in that area and ask them. But yeah, I really think VRBO, Airbnb, Furnished Finder, those are going to be the places where you have the most options.
Yeah, I know some other people have also mentioned looking at like colleges in the area. If there are any colleges near where your contract might be, there could be sublets, or there could be rentals available through the housing for the university. So sometimes there's Facebook groups for that, or sometimes you can go to the university websites and find out information like that. Like Jared said, you could also talk to HR. You could contact a local realtor and see if they know of anything. We actually, people talk. So like sometimes even just talking to a realtor, they may not have something listed, but some of them have rentals themselves or have friends who have rentals. And they might be like, oh yeah, my friend has a rental and they've rented to travel nurses before. And so sometimes if you say travel therapist, they're not as familiar with that. But if you say travel nurse, say, oh, it's like a travel nurse. They might be like, oh yeah, travel nurses. We've had travel nurses in the area before. So there's a lot of different avenues you can go if you ask around.
Yep.
So a similar question, Paloa asks, I hope I'm saying that right, Paloa says, is there a website to see what is an average rent cost for a location or state?
I think Zillow has that information. If you look up specific areas, it'll tell you what the average rent is. But it's hard because it's really difficult to compare one place to another. You know, there's differences in square footage and number of bedrooms and area of town and all of that. So it's hard to, you can come up with an average, but it's hard to see like exactly what it would be for whatever you're looking for, short-term rental, 1 bedroom, whatever. But
I also think if you look it up that way, it's probably going to be for long term. Like if you look up average rent, it's probably going to be for a 12-month lease.
Yeah.
So I think your best bet for getting a quick look, like what I would personally do, is if I was trying to decide, oh, my recruiter has this job for me, it sounds really great, but they need an answer in 48 hours. I would personally go to Facebook Marketplace, do a quick search, go to Furnish Finder, do a quick search, and just see what's on there. Now, it doesn't mean you've had time to contact and call all these places and see if they're actually available, but at least will give you an idea of whether you're going to be able to find something reasonably or not, or if it's just going to be out of the question and it's like there's nothing there or it's way too expensive, I'm going to pass on this job.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would use those quick searches. Okay, so the next thing that we were going to get into was talking about RV as an option. So any updated thoughts on RVing versus short-term rentals with the current market? So is it a better idea to get into RVing to save money versus short-term rentals?
So overall, I would say that both are up right now since COVID. So short-term rentals are more expensive and campgrounds are more expensive. Both of them have higher demand. In terms of which one's up more, again, very area specific. There are some campgrounds that are still, they haven't raised their rates at all. And there are some areas of the country where rent prices and house prices haven't increased that much. But there, like I said, there's also places where they've gone up over 100%. So very area specific in terms of which one will be better. I would say average, they're probably increased about the same. One thing that has increased a lot more in terms of if you want to travel in an RV is the price of the RV. So campground hasn't increased that much in a lot of areas, but the cost of used RVs are up significantly. And I think that is starting to correct a little bit. They kind of went up with the price of used cars. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know used cars prices have been up. I think the average was 60% since the pandemic started, which is insane. And I think RVs were about the same for quite a while. And those prices are starting to normalize now. They're coming down a little bit, but they're still elevated. So if you are considering RV, you have to think about how much more now an RV would cost than it would have 2 years ago, and not just include the campground rent.
Yeah. But from folks that we talked to who are currently RVing, a lot of them said they still felt like it was very financially feasible for their situation. But like we've talked about before, and we're actually going to do a video soon. As soon as we get a chance to do our next regular live video, we've been meaning to do an updated one about RVing. So stay tuned for that because we'll do a whole thing about it. But in general, it's not always going to be financially feasible for everybody because you have to consider the upfront costs. If you're a solo traveler versus traveling with a family, a lot of people choose to do it because it's more feasible with the family or with pets or both or with a spouse than it is finding short-term rentals that fit their needs. Whereas as a solo traveler, you might save a lot more money just renting a room in a house or renting a solo place by yourself.
Yeah, if you're a solo traveler and you're able to rent a room in a house that's okay with you, I think that's always going to be cheaper when you factor in all the costs. If you're a couple, most couples don't want to rent a room in a house, then that can push things in favor of an RV a little bit. But then again, it depends on how long you plan to travel. We always talk about that. If you're only going to travel for a short period of time, then it doesn't give you much time to make up the cost, the upfront cost of the RV. And a lot of times you have depreciation on the RV, which takes up a lot of the cost. So if you're only going to travel a short time, usually it doesn't make sense to buy an RV. But if you're going to travel for 5 years, then it makes a lot of sense. The other thing is, like Whitney said, if you have pets, it's a lot easier with an RV than to try to find a place. And then usually they have additional pet fees and you have other things that you have to worry about, like is there going to be damage that then you get charged for when you leave and stuff like that. And if you have kids, then that makes finding short-term housing significantly more difficult, so an RV might make sense there. So those are some considerations to think about.
So the next question we got about RVing was, what has been your average commute time with short-term rentals versus RV? So we've always been very conscientious of our commute time because we think it's such a waste of time to have a long commute. We hate it. We hate traffic. We hate driving. So we've always been very conscientious about choosing either RV parks or short-term rentals, and we've almost never had a commute longer than 30 minutes. One time I had a long commute, and that was only because Jared had a really good job opportunity and he wanted to extend, and it kind of put us in a bind where I needed to find a new job in that same area. And so for a little while I had kind of a long, like 45 minutes to an hour commute, but that was a very short time. Everything other than that, we've always had less than a 30-minute. We've had anything from a 5-minute commute to a 20-minute commute, I would say, the majority of our contracts.
In our last contract, I could walk to work, so it was very short. I've never had a commute more than, I think 20 minutes was the max for me, and it really is about the same whether we've stayed at a campground or stayed at a short-term rental. But we also, like Whitney said, we're very selective in the contracts we choose based on knowing if there's housing options that are not going to be far away. We won't take a job and then have to drive 45 minutes each. So we've purposely kind of done it that way, but you guys can do that as well.
Yeah, and with that said, if you're looking at the RV option, it may limit where you choose to go. So you might not be able to go to a city because there might not be an RV park nearby. And if you really want to work in a city and the nearest RV park is an hour away, well, then that's going to be a problem, and it's up to you whether that commute time is worth it. But we've been able to find jobs in areas where an RV park was 30 minutes or less, always. Okay. Any recent job market trends since our last update? No, everything's pretty much the same. We just did an update 2 or 3 weeks ago at the beginning of October, so not much has changed since then, so I would refer back to that video.
Yeah, still some really high-paying jobs. I would say the average has started to trend down a little bit still, but there's still a lot of jobs open, especially for PTs, SLPs, so it's still a great market, still better than we ever had pre-COVID. So good time to travel, and not any big changes. We'll probably do another update in a few months, but things are about the same.
Yep, and along the same lines, somebody else asked about the travel job market this winter. I took a perm job back home for a little bit to be near family, but now I'm considering getting back to travel toward the end of the year or next year. So same thing, and I think this person was a PT who asked this. Absolutely, the job market, we fully anticipate it'll still be great into the beginning of next year, so still a great time to get into it. Okay, are you generally optimistic, pessimistic, or neutral about the future of therapy reimbursement considering the context of perpetual rising cost of living and inflation?
I think it's very difficult to be optimistic about reimbursement rates because we graduated now 7.5 years ago, and it's been nothing but declining reimbursement rates since we graduated. So I don't see any reason to be overly optimistic about it, and I would say overall pretty pessimistic because healthcare costs are rising, and insurance companies and Medicare, Medicaid are all looking for ways to cut costs. And outpatient services, rehabilitation services are kind of like a low-hanging fruit where they can kind of cut costs, even though it's probably not in the patient's best interest. You could probably cut costs somewhere else, and it would be better overall for the patient, but it's easier to justify that thing than to like decrease costs in the emergency room or urgent care or medications or something like that where it could literally be life or death for people. So I would say I'm overall pretty pessimistic about it. And then I also wrote an article, I think it's been 3 or 4 months ago, about inflation and how I think that inflation is actually going to be a net negative for therapist pay because the costs, especially for outpatient, because the costs are going up for the clinic owners. Their rent's higher, their electricity prices are higher, their support staff costs are higher, and reimbursement rates are staying the same or decreasing. So if your costs are higher and your expenses are higher, but your reimbursement's the same, you have to cut costs somewhere, and therapist pay is potentially where they're going to cut costs. They can decrease their margins only so much before they go out of business. So if it's between cutting therapist pay or going out of business, they're going to cut therapist pay. So I think that inflation is also going to be a downward pressure on pay for therapists. And both of those things combined are not good.
So I'm looking at this and I'm realizing I just put those 2 questions back to back. I put, how is the job market outlook, back to back with what's the outlook, and are you pessimistic about reimbursement? So how do we reconcile these 2 things?
Yeah, those are not exactly comparable because for the job market for therapy or for travel therapy, it's great. There's so many job options right now. That could stay the case forever. This could be the new normal, or this could just be a temporary blip and you have to take advantage of it now, and there might be a time later where their pay packages drop below where they were before COVID.
So what I would say about it, because I was brainstorming while you were talking before and explaining why you're pessimistic about it, is probably we're more pessimistic about the job opportunities and the wages for permanent therapists, unfortunately. Yeah. I do think there's always going to be a need for travel therapists, and it's going to be in your benefit to be a travel therapist if you want to make higher income, because you're going to be more willing to go where the jobs are paying higher. There's going to be certain circumstances with certain hospital systems, certain home health companies, certain skilled nursing facilities, certain outpatient facilities where they have the opportunity to pay higher because of the need, because of the demand. And if you're willing to go there as a traveler, you can still make really good money as a therapist. If you're somebody who's stuck in a permanent position in one location and you're not willing to move from that location, and all the facilities in your area start driving rates down, well, then you're really stuck. So you may have to look into some other options. Is travel feasible for you? Can I get a PRN job? Can I do a cash pay type situation where I'm not so reliant on reimbursement rates? So there may, you may have to look into some other options. But in terms of travel therapists, there's always going to be a demand in certain areas where when push comes to shove, they have to have a therapist at that hospital. They have to have a therapist at that facility. And so they'll find a way to pay more to get somebody to come there. So if you're in a situation where you are mobile and you are flexible, you can go to where those higher rates are available.
Yeah, and in addition to that, facilities, hospitals, skilled nursing, an outpatient clinic that doesn't have a therapist, an evaluating therapist, they have to have someone. And there's situations where for travel contracts, the facility can actually lose money on that traveler and it still be in their benefit because say, I've talked about this before, but say you bring in a traveler that's a PT that can do evaluations and they're mostly doing evaluations, re-evals, discharges, and you have PTAs that can do the treatments and they can make enough money off the PTAs doing treatments to pay more and actually lose money on the traveler. They can't do that long term though. So for a permanent therapist, they're not going to hire someone where they're losing money. But for a traveler, for 3 months, they might do that. So the pay rates are not necessarily going to be always correlated. So I could see a situation where travel pay stays fairly consistent, maybe goes down a little bit, whereas permanent pay decreases just gradually over time, which is terrible for therapists.
Yeah, so I mean, time will tell, but unfortunately, in talking, we've been in the therapy industry since we graduated 7 years ago. So we don't have a ton of perspective beyond 7 years, but we have talked to people who have been in the staffing space for decades. We've talked to therapists who have been travelers or been permanent therapists who've gone back to traveling for decades. And unfortunately, a lot of them say that, reimbursement has only gone down, that pay has only gone down, that some of them are still seeing the same pay for new grads and for experienced therapists and for travel therapists now that they were seeing 20 years ago, even though cost of living is higher now and cost of school is higher now and things like that. So it is definitely unfortunate, but if you guys want to see a change there, I think the only thing we can really do is to advocate, is to talk to your governing body for PT, for OT, for SLP, talk to Medicare, write letters, talk to legislatures, try to see if there's any way we can continue to drive these professions forward so that there won't be all these cuts from insurance companies or the government on our wages. Or you have to look at a business model or a way to make income that isn't so tied to what a third party is going to reimburse you.
Yeah. I've talked to some older therapists that were saying that they've made the same or more in the 90s based on, what they were making at permanent jobs versus what new grads and therapists are making at permanent jobs now. And if you think about that in inflation adjusted terms, that's basically they were making double back then what we're making now. And that's really sad. But you have to remember that it's not just therapy specific. There's, almost all of healthcare is complaining about decreasing wages. And if you go to any group, PA groups, nurse practitioner groups, PCP groups, if you go to vet groups, like they're all complaining about declining reimbursement and lower wages and seeing more patients. And if you think about it, the reason that PCPs and a lot of physicians are still able to make a decent amount of money is they're seeing a ton of patients. They're seeing some cases 30, 40 patients a day, whereas us as therapists, we don't want to do that. There might be a time in the future where that's the business model and that's how it goes, but hopefully that won't be the case.
Yeah. So like I said, either, advocate to try to find a way to get those reimbursements back up, or find a way to earn income and make a business for yourself that's not so tied to those third-party reimbursements.
Yep.
Okay, just a couple more questions here. These last two are scenarios. So one therapist who's in our course group says, I've been working as a full-time permanent salaried employee for the entire 10 years that I've been out of school with the same employer. Jared, can you actually read this one? Sorry, guys. I caught a little bit of a cold and my throat is bothering me a little bit.
All right. I've been working as a full-time permanent therapist salaried employee for the entire 10 years I've been out of school with the same employer. I've decided to strike out and travel for the financial benefits and change in life situation. Starting the process of applying for additional licenses, and one state in particular states it will take 8 to 12 weeks to process. As part of the application, they want an employer verification form filled out as part of the process. I was hoping to have licenses in hand before I tend my resignation and tell them my plans, but I'm not sure I see a way around this. Thoughts? Thanks so much. I'm a little over halfway through the course. I'm very glad I invested in it. Although I've chatted a lot with a friend that has been doing travel for years, this is just so much more in depth, and I think that will be vital coming out on top with this complete paradigm shift for me.
So I put some thought into this. So there's a few options. So one, if you're worried about, resigning from your job and you don't want to let your employer know yet, maybe you could look at just taking your first travel job in your home state where you already have a license to avoid that hurdle before going ahead and pulling the trigger and putting in your resignation and that sort of thing. And that would also ease your transition into starting. The other option would be if for some reason you really want to get a license in another state, maybe look at a licensing state where they don't require an employer verification. Not all states do require that. So that would be your second option. Third option, see if that employer verification could maybe be done by a coworker instead of a manager. In case you don't want to let your manager know, but you don't mind letting your coworker who you trust know. But last option, obviously, if it's absolutely the state you want to go to, if there's no way to get around it, you may just unfortunately have to let your boss know sooner than what you thought. But I would try to go with those first three options if possible.
Yeah, I would say the easiest thing would just be to do at least one contract in a state that doesn't require that. And that's not a common thing. I actually had never heard of employer verification form filled out. So I'm not sure what state that is, but that's definitely not a common thing. We've never done that before. So if you can get a license, take a job in a state that doesn't require that, and then just get that license while you're working that first contract, I would say that would be the ideal. But yeah, like Whitney said, if there's no other option, then you can just explain the situation. Hopefully it doesn't take 8 to 12 weeks. A lot of states, they'll overestimate just because things could move slow. But I would say it's pretty rare for it to take that long. We've only had 2 licenses that took that long, and there were Hawaii, Alaska that were, those are always harder to get anyway.
Yeah. Okay, and then you want to read that last scenario?
All right. I saw that.
About our Q&A.
Okay. I just finished Module 3 of your comprehensive course, but I'm thinking about starting travel in January, so I feel I should be further along in the course and speaking with a recruiter already. I originally spoke with a couple recruiters you guys gave me this past spring, but I don't know if it's too late to reach back out to them. I'm from Michigan, thinking about a first assignment in Michigan or Florida. Haven't got to the point of figuring out getting a license in another state yet. I'm so excited to have you guys as a resource and your course, but between both of my jobs, I'm having a hard time going through it all, and I just feel a little scared to take this leap of faith. Sorry for this book. I just wanted to be honest and let you know where I am in my journey and how to best get my butt moving forward.
So we received this question from one of our course members, and I actually sent her a long answer, but I wanted to answer it for you guys here too. So in terms of feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I can totally understand that. I can totally understand, it's scary to take that leap of faith, to go ahead and move forward, but you just have to look at it like, okay, I've set a goal for myself. I really want to do this, new year, new goal, new me. It's a great time right now to go ahead and reach back out to those recruiters. Don't worry that you haven't talked to them in 6 months, or don't worry even if you're somebody else who's in the same situation who hasn't even talked to a recruiter yet. It's fine. They do it all the time. They are happy to talk to you no matter if you're ready to start tomorrow or if you're ready to start in 6 months. They're excited to talk to you. So absolutely reach back out to those recruiters. For somebody else who's listening who this isn't your exact scenario, let us know if you need contacts to get in touch with some recruiters. They'll be so excited to help you. If January is your goal, right now is a great time to talk to them, and they'll help you to get a game plan in place. For your particular situation, because you're feeling really overwhelmed and just feeling like you're not going to actually be ready to start here in a couple months, my best advice for you would be to take your first travel job in your home state. Then you don't have to worry about that hurdle of getting a new license right away. It'll take a lot of the stress out because you'll just take your first travel job within a few hours of home, within 1 or 3 or 5 hours of home in your home state. You'll be in familiar territory. It'll seem less stressful. You won't have to get a new license. All you'll be basically doing is putting in your notice at your current job and just taking a new job a couple hours away. And that'll help you get started. That'll help you to really understand and immerse yourself in the process, and the recruiters will help you. And then once you're already on that contract, now you've freed yourself of the burden of taking that first step. Now it'll all make a lot more sense. You'll be like, oh great, I'm on this contract. Now I'll just start thinking about my next contract from here. I'll start thinking about my next license from here. You don't have to go and dive in head first and move all the way across the country for your first one. I would say dip your toe in by taking your first job in your home state.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice for anybody that's hesitant to start. That's exactly what we did starting out. we were nervous. We started as new grads, like we've said multiple times, but I was very nervous. I didn't know if it would go well. We didn't know what average pay was. We didn't know anything back then. We talked to one therapist that had done it before and had since stopped traveling, so I didn't know if things had changed since they stopped traveling. We were very nervous, and I thought, okay, we'll take a job a couple hours from home. If it goes terribly, this will be one contract, we'll be done, we'll come back home and start anew. And I think having that fallback, it really helps. I think if you move far away and you have a tough first assignment, it's really easy to be like, forget this is not for me. Whereas if you're only a couple hours from home, you have some familiarity and it's a lot easier. So I would say that's really good advice. The other thing I would say is, I'm sure Whitney has already looked at this. I'm not sure who sent this, but if it's been a while since you've talked to recruiters, the travel recruiter industry changes quickly. We constantly are adding recruiters, subtracting recruiters. People are leaving. Just since COVID, we've probably had 12 to 15 recruiters stop recruiting. So there's a potential that they're not working there anymore, in which case, it's always a good idea at least to reach out back to us and say, these are the people you sent me to. Would you still recommend them or anyone else? And then we can adjust if needed.
Yeah, definitely do that. If you're somebody else who's listening to this and you're in that same situation, reach back out to us and say, would these still be the same ones that you would recommend? Yeah. And we can let you know if they're still there, or if maybe for some reason we don't recommend them anymore. In this person's scenario, I did look back at the ones that she asked about, and they're all still active, and they're actually 3 of our best ones that I would highly recommend based on this person's situation. If you guys are worried or feeling uncertain, when you fill out our recruiter recommendation form, tell us as much information as you can about your situation, because I read every one of them, and I'm going to match you with recruiters who I feel like are going to work well for your situation. And luckily for this person, the 3 recruiters that we matched her with, I absolutely feel like are going to be the type to be very supportive and very much can walk you through step by step. Now, if you had reached back out and told me like you were really worried, and I'd looked at the recruiters and been like, those ones aren't necessarily going to mentor you as well. Maybe this one will be better. But then I can let you know. Or there's some of you guys who might reach out and say like, I don't even need a mentorship. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I don't have any questions. I just want the recruiter who has the highest pay or this or that. We can kind of point you in the direction of which recruiter might fit best for you. But for this person's scenario, I think the 3 that you are already talking to are great. They're going to help you get started. The last thing I want to say about this scenario is this person who is feeling very overwhelmed about her situation because she's working full time, and she's like, how am I going to make time to go through this course? I'm only on module 3. I think there's like 18 or 19 modules. I told her you just have to set a goal. It's 12 hours total. Just tell yourself, okay, this week I'm going to get through 2 hours of the course. Look at it like graduate school. In graduate school, you were really good at organizing your time and being like, I have to study for this test and I have to do this project by Sunday. So just look at it like, this is my goal. This is my life. This is what I want to do. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take these 2 hours of the course. Just do it in bite sizes. We have 10 more weeks until the end of the year before you need to start your first contract in January. So you can do this. If it's your goal and you really want to get the most out of it, just look at it in bite sizes and make a plan.
Yeah. And when he was talking about recruiters, so there's a lot that goes into those recommendations she makes. And yeah, like any additional information you can provide, because I've written before a couple articles now about the recruiter-traveler relationship and how that varies drastically. So when you guys send forms in, we're not just looking at what location, what setting, and what you're looking for in terms of benefits, pay, all that, but also there's different types of travelers. There's travelers that really need help and they're very fearful, or there's travelers that just are ready to go. They don't care. They'll go anywhere. And based on that, there's recruiters that will work better well with those, or we've learned over time they work better with some travelers than others, because every recruiter has their own personality. And some are like, I don't want to deal with someone that they need a lot of help and they're very uncertain. And there's other ones that are like, oh yeah, I'll talk to them all day and really make them feel better about it. So it's not just what setting you want and what location you want. There's a lot that goes into that. So try to include as much information as you can, and we'll try to get the best matches for you guys.
Yeah, we've taken, I think Jared added up the other day, we work with currently about a dozen companies, and I think we have over 50 recruiters.
Yeah, I think it's 54 recruiters now.
And all time, we've talked to over 100 recruiters to narrow it down to ones that we like. I've spoken to every single one of them on the phone. I don't refer you to any recruiters that I've not spoken to personally on the phone, who I know most of them very well. I know exactly what type of recruiter they are. I'm going to match you with somebody who I feel like is going to be a good fit for you. So to piggyback off that, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say your name. Now I'm looking at it closer, and it might be more like Paula, Paola, Paula or Paloa. Says, I'm in the same boat and situation. I only have one recruiter that has kept in touch with me. I would like to get in touch with others. Thanks for the advice. Yeah, if that's the case, if you feel like you talked to some recruiters a while back, but only one of them is really keeping in touch with you, it could be that you just need to check back in with the other ones because some of them don't want to bother you. Oh, she clarified how to say her name.
Paola.
Paola. Okay, Paola. Sorry about that. It could be that they just don't want to bother you because they haven't heard from you in a while. Maybe they think you're not interested anymore. So it could just take you just sending one quick email to reconnect. But if really you're just not that interested because you feel like they haven't taken the time to care about you and you would rather just forget about those ones and start anew, let us know. We can happily offer you some other recommendations for new recruiters.
Yep. And like we said, we're always adding and subtracting. So there's always a chance that the ones... they're not even people we work with anymore. They're not recruiting anymore. Things change really quickly.
Yep, absolutely. So just let us know if you need some updated recommendations or contacts. We're happy to help.
Yep, I think that's all the questions. If you guys have any more, feel free to leave a comment later in this video. We'll come back and answer it in text. We're leaving in less than a week on our next international trip. So we'll try to do videos while we're gone. It just depends always on the Wi-Fi situation, but try to do one every couple weeks. I want to do one coming up about contract cancellations. I've seen a lot of questions about that. We've gotten a lot of questions recently about contract cancellations either during the contract or before the contract starts. Talk about some of what goes on there. If you guys have any other recommendations on things to talk about, we can go more in depth on. We always love those, and can always try to do a longer video on very specific things.
Yeah, and we've been meaning to do that RV one for a while, so we need to do that RV one soon. But let us know if you have any questions. For those of you guys watching that are in our course group, let us know if you'd like to set up your one-on-one mentorship call. We're happy to do that whenever. If you're someone who's not in our course group listening to this later on our podcast, you can also set up a call with us, but we do charge for people who are not in our course group. We do paid consultation calls. But feel free to send us a message on social media or send us an email if you have any questions.
Yep. All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Have a good night.